Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out again. And I say that every time because you have to come out, but I'll still thank you during these still trying times of the COVID. Now, behind me, as I mentioned before in another lecture, is the building of UNASUR that was, remember, it did get taken down when there was a change of guard, that is presidencies in Ecuador. So, and as in any country, you see the rise of the left, the rise of the right, the rise of the middle, whatever you want to call it. But, different presidents taking over. So then different policies are going to be in place. What the goal here today is to understand the idea of space. Space isn't just some crazy thing. Hey, man, I need my space. Well, hey, woman, I need my space. This is about making space in international organizations. Public space is very important. We see it. Let's say you go to Scottsdale and you walk around in the park like I've done in the old town. That's public space. Anyone can go. What space is the idea that you need space for sometimes alternative policies. The point of my article on South-South relations was South-South relations actually opens up space. So like UNASUR addressed the crisis, as you'll read, between Venezuela and Colombia, which they had historically bad relations due to land disputes and water disputes. When we talk about the law of the sea, we get into that more. But UNASUR actually opened up space for different conflict resolution strategies that you will see. The same thing goes with Colombia. A lot of people, if you've taken my class, I talk about it a lot, but when the FARC went into the negotiations, the peace process with the government a while back, well, the first, as you'll read in the article, the first time under a man named Pastrana, President Pastrana, it sounds funny, but he basically, it wasn't that it didn't work out, as you'll see in the thing. But what happens is using South-South relations, Cuba and Colombia coming together. Remember, Cuba was run by a right winger. Santos was the minister of defense under a man named Uribe, who was very tough on the FARC, etc. So it wasn't any kind of lefty in Colombia, but it was a very strategic center-right thinker. And he saw Cuba as a way to open up space. Cuba opened up space by making relations with Cuba on a number of points. Number one, Cuba allowed the FARC, who a lot of people wanted to kill, a safe place to hammer out the deal. Second, being in Cuba, the FARC couldn't rearm like it did under President Pastrana and then take massive amounts of land from Colombia, because that's what Pastrana did. He gave them like the size of Switzerland in Colombia. And they used that, the FARC, the guerrilla group trying to overthrow the government, used that land to go back to sequestrando, how do you say, kidnapping, taking people, murder, etc., which, I mean, the government does as well. But it didn't work out well. Putting the FARC in Cuba actually opened up space for the government, because then they couldn't rearm in Cuba, because Cuba's a whole different country. Third, Cuba's like the only country that recognized the FARC as legitimate combatants, and they couldn't go anywhere else, or they would be arrested and then charged for terrorism, etc. So Cuba opened up space, and by using Cuba and having the main FARC members there, it removed the head of the FARC, which is very hierarchical in its thinking, opposed to the ELN, which the Colombian government is having problem with. It removed the main people in the FARC, even hardliners, like Paisa, who actually went back to fighting, but he was actually in Cuba to make sure they would not go back to fighting. And having Cuba on board gave the peace process legitimacy. And it opened up all of this space, as I'm noting, which was very, very strategic. So there were a lot of people that didn't like the peace process. There were a lot of people that did like it. I didn't see any other way. I mean, the FARC has been fighting for like 60 years. How are you going to end this crisis? This is an ongoing crisis that just, seen fiend without an end, like the IRA, this is the only way to do it. And that opened space. So international organizations and other South-South relations, etc., can open up alternative ideas. That's what UNASUR did, not only for the case study I talk about in the article on South-South relations, between Colombia and Venezuela, but also when there was a crisis in Bolivia, not the more recent crisis, but back a while ago, when the right wing was actually going to do a coup over the democratically elected Evo Morales. This was before the more recent one. And UNASUR stepped in and hammered out a good deal that created stability in the country. So the point is, some of these alternative regional organizations you don't think of actually opens up space. And the peace process, from my point of view, even though there's a lot of problems with it, I'm going back to Colombia, has been very, very successful. In fact, you'll see another video later on when we talk about, how to decrease these conflicts, because that's what organizations are supposed to do. There's a lot of space on the ground in these countries that are trying to incorporate ex-combatants. And the United Nations also played an important role. And this is where I talked about with the resources, because the United Nations came in and collected the weapons of the FARC. The FARC have been fighting the Colombian government for like 60, 50 years, about a half a century, let's just say, because, when it exactly started is a little debatable. But this was the most intractable conflict in all of Latin America. And this is extremely important for people to understand. So, we can create space in international relations. And moreover, does international law help create space? But there is something that I want to talk about. And that is, in the Herd book, you read about the shrimp turtle fiasco by the WTO. The WTO is like the WHO, right? Who's the WHO? Before the COVID, no one really talked about the WHO, the World Health Organization, but we're actually having a debate on it. The thing about the WTO, the World Trade Organization, not many people talk too much about it, but it does play a significant role. And the other problem with some of these institutions, mainly what I'm going to talk about with the WTO, is that it can actually close space to policy. As you read in that case, the WTO sometimes rules against the environment and says, hey, this is more pro-trade, more pro-business. You can't slap environmental laws on certain, like, say, in this case, fishing to protect the turtles, because it hurts trade. And now you're being unfair with trade. And this becomes problematic. Now, the book tries to take a more nuanced approach. It even uses the word nuance by saying, well, it didn't really rule against the environmental regulation, but more so the restriction of trade, etc. And whether the United States or other countries are imposing its own laws, etc. But the point is that, a lot of countries put environmental laws on, and then those countries get taken to the to the WTO for a court. And they often get ruled against. And this becomes problematic when we start seeing things on NAFTA with the treaty, the part of the treaty. We're going to do a section on treaties. Do these international treaties actually close space? I'm talking about more economic treaties, close space to economic policy. So if a country goes into a policy with the IMF, even though it really needs it, because the IMF has become the last resort for funding, it can actually close space on policy and do the exact opposite of what I was talking about, opening space for creative and alternative economic conflict resolution policies. This can actually close policies. So if you had something like the turtle and shrimp issue, you could actually close space by saying, hey, it's illegal to have these environmental laws. And this happened in El Salvador. This has happened in Mexico. There have been famous cases where, because of NAFTA, Mexico was sued because it was imposing environmental regulation on a company, even though that environmental regulation might be important for, well, the environment. Like, for example, you are polluting important rivers and lakes that actually people use to clean their babies, because we forget a lot of people don't have access to clean water, or sinks. We take that for granted. I lived in Nicaragua for 8 years of my life because I thought it was my duty to go there, understand the people, etc. And I've been going to Colombia, etc. And I lived in some poor parts, and a lot of people don't have running water in their house, so they have to go to the local lake or river to clean things. And if a corporation, like a mining corporation, is leaking cyanide or something like that in the water, and the state, let's say a Mexican state, because Mexico is created by these federations. It's not just one unitary government. The NAFTA, the United States, or a corporation can take the state of Mexico to court. And this becomes problematic. So we might be closing space with some of these deals. NAFTA is the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. A lot of people say, Trump made it better or changed it. He didn't change it that much. CAFTA is the more Central American Free Trade Agreement. And there was a lot of controversy, over the controversial Pacific Act that was, Trump got out of, Elizabeth Warren. Actually, it was Obama that was pushing it. Clinton was the one who signed NAFTA. So these have become more controversial now, because like the Trans-Pacific Agreement, does that hurt the environment? And this is something we're going to really get into, and you're going to read that chapter in the law book on the environment, and it gets into the same issues as, human rights. To what extent do states have to comply? To what extent do states, support this, what we call environmental sovereignty? This is going to be a huge thing in international law. And if you haven't thought about the cases that you have to do, because you have to do a case study in this course at the end of the course, you can start thinking about, environmental laws, internationally speaking, environmental, international law, the WTO, etc., and to see, what's happening. So the goal of this lecture was kind of pointing out how some organizations and certain relations, South-South relations, can open up space for alternative conflict resolution policies and economic policies that otherwise wouldn't have been considered. They can also close space, like the WTO. And you have to think about it. Does the WTO close space to alternative environmental policies? And this has been, even like, I'm a little older than you, not much older, I hope. But, I remember, the WTO in Seattle, there was a huge protest. They couldn't even get the whatever you would call conference meetings off the ground. So then they started taking these more economic, internationally oriented conferences, etc., to countries where you can't protest, like Dubai, where they would kill you, or like someplace like in the middle of Switzerland in the Alps, where no one can go to and protest, or Colorado in a very high mountain where people just can't get access to protest. So that's also closing space. They take a lot of these conferences to areas where people just can't protest. And is that democracy? So that's what I want you to start thinking about with this week. And when we see climate refugees, that's another issue. Can organizations or international law address this growing issue of what we call climate refugees? And if you notice in this documentary, even very conservative Newt Gingrich has a short cameo. John Kerry's in it, but you'd figure he'd be in it. All these lefties are in it. But anyways, I mean, Newt Gingrich, he's a righty. I say lefty, righty, whatever. He's a right winger. Very strong Trump supporter, etc. I mean, his like third wife got a gig with in the Vatican, the embassy. So of course he's gonna love Trump, but he's very conservative, and even he is saying that this could be a very big issue with national security throughout the world. So we have to start dealing with these issues through law, organizations, treaties, which we're going to get into, among other ways to approach this on an international scale. So thanks for listening, everyone. And I hope you're all doing well with the COVID. I hope you don't have COVID, but I actually got my vaccination. I am not dead. See, I thought the side effect was going to be death, but apparently not. So now I can go back to licking doorknobs and other things. So take care, everyone, and stay safe.